Yeah, so and again, I'm just using that as one kind of extreme example. And it's like, which frame do you put around that? Because it was really courageous. And I can say on one level, it was my path. I can propose all kinds of counterfactuals, and I want to explore some of those other possibilities. But it is what happened. That is the reality. But this is kind of, and I'm just using this again, hopefully to point to a more universal pattern that I want to tease out if I can. So I did that. I felt like God spared my life. I mean, I really felt like that. Yeah, God. I had so many, man, there's just so much I want to say about it. I can remember in the lead up to that just anguishing for days, like, fuck, man, I can't believe I did this, and I can't believe, am I really gonna go to jail? Am I turning myself over to authorities? God, if there's some other way. I remember driving out into the forest, just praying, please, somebody help me. Archetypically, I connect a lot with Jesus, obviously. I feel very powerfully connected to Jesus, to Christ. And I kept having images of Gethsemane. Not at all to be grandiose at all, just to, you could say archetypically, mythically. I tend to think, there's a historical dimension here also, but Christ in Gethsemane, and they talk about that his agony and the anguish, recognizing what he has to go through, and that he's sweating blood out of the pores of his face. That sweat and blood was pouring down his face because of the anguish. And that's his humanity, right? That's Christ's humanity. Or yeah, I'm sure there's other. Father, if it be thy will, let this cup pass from my lips. Just that kind of energy. I kept having that. Yeah, that aspect of Christ's life became very real to me in that state of mind. I don't know why I'm sharing all that, but I feel like there's another image I want to bring in, but it's not coming forward. Christ in Gethsemane. Guess the agony of the cross. Not my will, but thy will. Yeah, so again, it's like you toggle between all these different perspectives. But after I did go forward to the authorities, and I felt like God had spared my life, I'd walked through the fire. I felt exalted in some sense. I felt like peace. I felt healing. I felt like I had moved through something that may have dogged me for the rest of my life had I not confronted it. But quickly on the heels of that, in fact, I think that very night, and I was staying in a hotel, I remember. The place that I was renting from, the people I just felt very unsafe at the place I was renting from. Yeah, because I was just suffering. I was just in this very difficult hell state in my mind and just suffering. And so staying at this hotel, and I remember I went back to the hotel, and I think either that night or that next day, very shortly thereafter, I just got hit with another wave of like, did you tell them 100% the truth? Did you fully lay out all the details that you intended to do this? That you had bad intentions, that you, like, did you perfectly 100% confess everything that you had done? Did they understand what you were saying? Maybe they didn't fully understand what you were saying. It's like all these doubts just flooded into my consciousness, and I was like, fuck. And I was back in the pattern of like this pressure building up, and it's like I'd just gone through torture, absolute hell, and found relief from surrendering. So I was like, fuck, I gotta go back. I gotta go back and lay it out again in more crystal clear detail. And I was getting prompts of exactly how I had to say it, and I intended to do this, and I was getting all these specific phrases that I had to say to make sure. And I did. I went back and I again laid it out, and again they said, no, you're not in trouble. You're not at all in trouble. You've done nothing wrong. You didn't do anything illegal. You're not in trouble. And so, yeah, that's just one example, just to show how wild it can get, how extreme it can get, how difficult and all-consuming these mind states can be. And I think if you've struggled with this pattern or with OCD, you'll be able to kind of sense in the background or in the foreground, implicitly or explicitly, you will be able to resonate with what I've just explained. And as I really didn't know OCD with that much detail, or didn't have a whole lot of information at that point. That came later, that I sort of started to piece all this together. At the time, I just was very vulnerable. But yeah, you'll hear that variations of that come up in other people's OCD stories. Again, I sort of hesitate to label something so explicitly with that diagnostic category of OCD, because I think those are just conventional terms. It's like a reference point that points to or describes. It's like a label that kind of for a set of behaviors, a set of, you could say, symptoms, or a set of patterns, psychological patterns. And it can be useful sometimes to have a label, because it helps you to have community, and people can kind of rally around a label and share information, and you can find, healing modalities and treatments. So it can be useful on one level, but there's a danger there also, because OCD is just a human convention. It's not reality. And you can overly identify with, there's no thing out there that is OCD. There's like a pattern that has been recognized within human psychology that has happened enough with enough people that you start to create a language for it. But there's a danger in overly identifying with one's diagnosis. And you are not your diagnosis. You are not your OCD, or, your schizophrenia, or your bipolar, or your anxiety, or, those are just, and then on the other hand, it can also be kind of, I don't want to just limit it to somebody with OCD. We're describing the human experience. We're describing human confusion. And so I think, people from whether or not you think of it as OCD. I think there's something universal that you can recognize in this and that you may confront on the healing path. But I did start to eventually, over time, explore OCD specifically because I think it is one frame. Again, it's like it's one frame that can be useful. It's good to have options. And you hear in people describing their OCD experience, you hear people talk about, like I'm thinking about one young lady who had this, her theme, to use the OCD language, was she would be driving somewhere and she would have this notion like, did I just run somebody over? I'm not laughing because it's funny, but it's like, wow, it's, the mind just throws this just the wildest shit out at us. But yeah, she would have this notion of like, did I just run somebody over when she would be out driving? And, rationally, here's the thing about OCD is it's not susceptible, really. I mean, it can be helpful in some, at certain moments, but typically speaking, it's not susceptible to just straight rationality. So it wouldn't be as simple as saying, of course you didn't hit somebody, that's crazy. No, it's like you get this thought coming in your mind, like, for her, did I run somebody over? I think I felt a bump back there. I think I saw something out of my periphery. And so she would drive around the block or wherever she was, she would go back and she would drive back and maybe look, I don't know if she said this, but maybe drive slowly and scan the environment, maybe get out and look at her car. Is there any evidence that I hit somebody? Is there blood or anything like that? And she could, I can't remember how much of, I might be synthesizing stories or embellishing a little bit, but I don't think too much, that she would drive around many times. Just OCD sort of, I think it historically was called the doubting disease. And there's a dimension of it. It's like this doubt comes into your mind of like, if your theme is contamination and you need to wash, it's like, shoot, I feel contaminated. I know I just washed, but I'm not sure I'm perfectly clean, or maybe there's still some germs I need to wash again. It's like it just feeds on the one hand, our values. So for this young woman, she values not hurting people, obviously, or whatever the value was. It latches onto that and it just distorts and it manipulates and it weaponizes our values against us. And so she would drive around and check, and just convinced that she had hit somebody, and she would see nothing, and then maybe she'd get a block away and be like, well, I didn't really check the bushes that well, or just the mind can find, there's an infinite variety of ways the mind can doubt, and that she turned herself over to the authorities a few times, saying that she thinks she ran somebody over. She went into the cops, and so you do hear examples of this and just how brutal that pattern can be. So you get the obsessive thoughts, did I run somebody over? And then the compulsion to check, or you turn yourself in, because what you're looking for is certainty. You're looking to clear the anxiety, and certainty is like peace. I've talked about all this before, so I don't want to retread it too much, but so with my example, I could say I had a value of honesty, of integrity, of accountability, of being spiritually surrendered, and but yeah, that pattern just kept cropping up in 100 different, it's like it reconfigures and finds latches onto something new. At one point, kind of during this whole chaotic season in my life, I had this notion come forward that I needed to give away all of my money. And again, it had this very strong flavor of this is a test from God. You know, it's not rational. It's not always going to be rational. You know, sometimes you just take the leap of faith. Yeah, and again, it figures out all your vulnerabilities. Because for me, I idolize and really look up to and am inspired by, like Saint Francis, in front of Bishop Guido, Guido, in Assisi. There's that scene of him, and I'm presuming historical. It corresponds to something that happened biographically in his life, that as he was starting to surrender to God at one point on his path, he, you know, before the town, before the bishop of the community, he stripped naked, took off all of his clothes. And his father, I believe, was this wealthy mercantile, I think he sold like fine silks and fine textiles and cloth to the nobility, to the mayores, to the upper class. And so, yeah, Francis came from the upper class. So I don't know if that's part of... Anyways, there's like many levels to the symbolism here, but he took off all of his clothing, all of his garments, stripped naked in front of the world, in front of the town, and handed over his clothes. Maybe he handed over to the bishop. Is that what happened? Or he just placed them into the side? And symbolically, it was like, I surrender. I belong to God now. I'm being reborn. I'm shedding everything that I was. That Francis is dead. I am now the child of God, not the child of... What was his last name? Bernardone? I can't remember. Giuseppe Bernardone. Is that his father's name? I can't remember his father's name, but I'm no longer my earthly father's child. And there's psychological dimensions to this too, obviously. But I'm the child of my Father, and I surrender everything that I am. And how beautiful and pure and true that is. Ooh, I can still feel it just talking about it. Yeah, archetypically true, mythically true, psychologically true, spiritually true, factually true. Just on every level, aligned with the highest, that surrender and rebirth as a son of God. But yeah, wow, what a dramatic scene, right? And so there's all Ramana surrendering, such a deep surrender that his body is so neglected. He's like in this dungeon, or not dungeon, but basement, neglected part of a temple in southern India. Where is that? Tiruvannamalai. I always have a hard time pronouncing this. Tiruvannamalai. I feel like that's not right. Anyways, you can look into him, amazing Indian saint. He's in such a surrendered state, such a high samadhi, so merged with God, so surrendered that his body is like being eaten by rodents and bugs, and eventually people have to feed him and take care of his body. And Christ surrendering to the cross. Yeah, so you can see how it just latches on, like the wounded, distorted, unhealthy, unhealed aspects of our psychology. I want to put an asterisk there because I think there are probably other ways, there's at least one other and probably many other ways to look at that. But we'll just say, wounded aspects of one's psychology. That pattern latches onto that takes those values, what's sacred, what's meaningful to you, and ramps it up till you're just in agony. Christ's saying to the rich man comes forward, Master, what must I do to inherit the kingdom? What must I do to enter into heaven, into the kingdom? Christ says, give away all of your possessions, give away all of your worldly goods, your money, your wealth. And so, yeah, you don't, and so I have this, I'm just using this as another explicit, concrete example. I have this thing come forward telling me you need to give everything away. It's coming with this urgency. It seems irrational. And I'm in agony because that's I'm already in a very kind of depleted, vulnerable state. And that just seems like the reality of being homeless, the reality of not having money. It just seems cruel, you know? But again, it's like if this is what it takes, oh Lord, I'm willing to. So this is where a teaching like surrendering to irrational prompts from God can be, is not at all abstract or theoretical. It can be very real and potentially very dangerous, and very important to seek a second opinion. To figure out what is important, what's real, what is useful here on the path. What is God actually calling me to do? But yeah, you get into the state of mind, it's like, fuck, I'm getting no relief. And part of that pattern, one of the things it tells you is you're never going to get relief until you do this thing. You can run from it, but you can't run forever. Eventually you'll break down, and you just get exhausted. And so I did reach out to some people, probably the wrong people in some cases. It's not that I feel regret, but I just feel kind of angry, the ways. You have to be careful. Find somebody that you can trust when you're going through a difficult time. Counselor, therapist, a teacher who's really done their healing work. And so what I would want to offer is, yes, potentially, the path will call on you to do extraordinary things or things that are out of the norm, push you out of your comfort zone. It's a possibility. I think most of it is internal. Most of it has to do with surrendering to the inner pain. But there is, the inner confusion, healing that which is coming forward. But there is a realignment that happens, needs to happen, or will happen. That we'll just say that happens externally if one's life and practice, beliefs, and actual habits in the world are very out of alignment. God wants to transform all of that, so there will be some external changes. And so a question that comes to me is like, did I have to go through all of that hell, the extremity of the path? And again, I'm sharing a very small fraction, some of the significant points, but there's a lot more I could say about. It's like I look back on that and just again, the courage. I can see how my values were honored in a sense, but I asked the question, could there have been a gentler, more incremental, healthier, more balanced way of doing all that? And on one level, it's just a counterfactual because what happened is what happened, but I tend to think there's 1,000 ways to have done things, to have midwifed this process, in a healthier way. And I don't think people need to go through the hell that I went through. And I know, yeah, it's all relative. It's not like, because I know people have been through a lot worse hells too. But I think there is a much gentler path, and a part of that is just having good support. And so, yeah, takeaways from all of this. Because it's like, how do you distinguish between what is authentically God's voice, what is authentically the path, what is intuition, what is calling from the higher self into a higher, vaster, truer, more connected experience. On the one side, how to distinguish between that on the one side, what is true, and what is this kind of counterfeit pattern that carries a lot of the hallmarks, a lot of the features of that you can feel like God is asking you to do something. You can feel like this is the path. You can feel like if I don't do this, I won't progress on the path. I'm going to regress. I won't heal. I'm going to be stuck in this cycle forever. Very difficult. It can be very difficult. Again, the best advice I can offer is to reach out and get a second and a third opinion if something that, if you're getting a message that seems crazy or irrational. See, I would tend to just exercise an abundance of caution if I were advising somebody, especially if it's coming with an urgency, like you have to do this. It has this flavor of urgency, that I need to do this now, and there's a big momentum and anxiety. See, one of the things that was confusing, especially like in the example I gave of having done something illegal, I thought I had done something illegal. Probably a better example would be with giving away all my money. I felt like huge anxiety and tension and inner conflict and inner turmoil, and I couldn't figure out, is the turmoil because I'm not surrendering to God's will, and that's why it's coming with this crushing weight, and that's what's producing the anxiety and the conflict? Or is it because this is inherently coming from an untrue place, and so it has this kind of bullying, totalitarian, dictatorial urge of, you have to do this? It was like hard to figure out. And it was leveraging this place within me of like, I want to do whatever it takes. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to heal, even if it seems crazy. So that was kind of the vulnerability. Ultimately, I did not give away all of my money at that stage. And I can't remember exactly how I got to the other side of that one. I think it was through talking with a number of people, and them kind of raising the alarm a little bit, like, this doesn't seem like it's coming from a good place. Yeah, but there was always a new one to replace it. And the problem is, with OCD, it's like the more you surrender to that pattern and you do what it's asking, the more it reinforces the cycle. And so it just, it strengthens that pattern, and it becomes more real, and you get more locked into it. Um, it's okay to doubt these urges. One of the things that you don't really want to say to somebody with OCD is like, just trust your intuition. Boy, that can be a very harmful, confusing, and just misguided thing to say, because OCD can often have a flavor of, this is real, this is intuition. This is my intuition telling me I need to do this ritual, or confront this person, or confess this thing, or, whatever the theme is. Do this movement, or so, yeah, just because something is irrational and seems to be coming from God, like a trial from God, does not at all mean that it's genuinely true. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to be a doubting Thomas in that case, to be skeptical. And it may be a lot easier, and over time it does get easier to some extent when you've kind of been on that merry-go-round 100 times, 1,000 times, and the next one, but man, it's just so insidious because the next one crops up in your mind. You have to do this, you need to do this, do this last one, and you'll be free. And it just feels so real. It's like maybe all the other ones were not real, and I got to the other side of them and they no longer bother me, but this one is real. If it doesn't feel great, if it doesn't feel peaceful, if it's bringing up a lot of anxiety, it's like you're just a human being. And yeah, if you're going through this, you're suffering a lot, and so be gentle with yourself. The idea of, in my mind, with, let's say, giving away my money, I was already in such a depleted and suffering state. The idea of like now impoverishing myself, making myself homeless, just like so cruel. Did not feel exalted, did not feel like Francis before Bishop Guido. And typically the relief you get is very short-lived. And then you get into this kind of paranoid relationship with your mind of, I surrendered, I did that thing, I passed the trial. It's awful, but I made it to the other side. And then you have this dawning thought of like, fuck. Like, I'm noticing the pattern, and shit, God's just gonna bring another one into my path. And so you can get this like preemptive anxiety before the next pattern, the next demand. OCD comes with a demand, that's a good word for it. Before the next demand surges forth in your consciousness, you're already like in this like frightened, paranoid state of like, please no more, I don't want to go through this anymore. And so it's just brutal. It can be very brutal. So yeah, I could say more. I could probably have said it better, but that's it for now. And just a note of caution, something to be aware of on the path. And again, if it's not relevant, just disregard it, but it might be helpful, might be useful for somebody to hear that. Take care.